The wipers fought against sheets of rain as Trevor Hayes navigated his battered pickup through the maze of empty warehouses. Then the world exploded. A silver sedan rocketed past the intersection, spinning twice through the air before slamming into the concrete barrier. Metal twisted. Glass showered the asphalt like deadly confetti. Flames licked hungrily at the crumpled hood, casting orange shadows across the abandoned industrial lot. Trevor's boots hit the pavement before his engine stopped running. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he glimpsed her, a woman draped in cream silk, her auburn hair matted with blood, diamond studs glinting against pale skin. The fire roared closer. Trevor seized his tire iron and shattered the passenger window in one fluid motion. Smoke clawed at his throat as he reached through twisted metal, his calloused hands finding her limp wrists. Her Chanel perfume mixed with the acrid stench of burning rubber as he dragged her free, her body surprisingly light in his arms. 3 days later, 10 obsidian SUVs pulled up to his rusted trailer, their engines purring like sleeping panthers, carrying passengers who would turn his world upside down in ways he never saw coming. 3 days earlier, Trevor's alarm clock screamed at 5:30 in the morning, its shrill cry piercing through dreams he couldn't afford to finish. His trailer groaned under the October wind, rain drumming against thin walls like impatient fingers demanding entry. The coffee maker wheezed and sputtered, producing something that barely resembled caffeine, but would have to sustain him through another day of fighting impossible odds. Medical bills carpeted his kitchen table like autumn leaves, each hospital letterhead swimming in red ink that told the story of his daughter's declining health. The largest bill sat prominently on top, its amount circled in angry red pen like a target he could never hope to hit. 8-year-old Hazel coughed from the bedroom, that wet, rattling sound that had become the soundtrack of Trevor's worst nightmares. He padded across creaking linoleum to check on his daughter, bare feet finding every cold spot on the unforgiving floor. Hazel was awake despite the early hour, her dark eyes too bright in her pale face, clutching the stuffed elephant he'd won her at the county fair 3 summers ago. "Morning, Daddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from another restless night of interrupted sleep. "Did you have the money dream again?" The question hit Trevor like a physical blow. His 8-year-old daughter shouldn't know about money dreams or midnight calculations or the sound of a father pacing the hallway at 3 in the morning. Dr. Thompson's words from their last visit echoed in Trevor's mind like a death sentence played on endless repeat. "The seizures are increasing in frequency and intensity, Mr. Hayes. The tumor is pressing against critical areas of her brain that control speech, motor function, and cognitive ability. Without surgical intervention within the next few weeks, we're looking at permanent neurological damage." When Trevor had asked the question that haunted every parent facing medical catastrophe, the doctor's response had been devastating. The surgery itself costs approximately $150,000. With hospital stay, medications, and follow-up care, you're looking at roughly $200,000 total. Unfortunately, your insurance has denied coverage, claiming the procedure is still considered experimental. The Riverside Steel Works loomed against the grey October sky like a sleeping giant made of rust and broken promises. Trevor punched his time card at exactly 6:45, maintaining the same ritual he'd performed religiously for the past 3 years. His workstation occupied a cramped corner where broken machinery came to die and occasionally, through his skilled hands, found new life. He possessed an almost supernatural ability with mechanical problems, could diagnose engine troubles that stumped college-educated mechanics with fancy degrees, but no real experience. The familiar smell of machine oil and welding sparks should have provided comfort, but today it felt suffocating, like breathing in the dust of his own failures. "Hayes!" The voice of Big Eddie Morrison, the plant foreman, cracked across the factory floor like a whip, cutting through the industrial symphony of grinding metal and hydraulic systems. The tone carried bad news the way storm clouds carried lightning, and Trevor's stomach dropped before he even turned around. The walk to Eddie's glass-walled office felt like a condemned man's final march, other workers suddenly finding their tools fascinating, averting their eyes with the superstitious fear of men who knew they could be next. Eddie's face was carved from stone, weathered by 30 years of delivering devastating news to decent men who deserved better. A pink slip already waited on his desk, crisp and official, and final as a death certificate. "Company's downsizing, Trevor," Eddie said without meeting his eyes, because even tough men had limits to their capacity for cruelty. "Corporate headquarters has mandated a 20% reduction across all departments. Last hired, first fired. You know how it works." Trevor's hands gripped the back of the chair until his knuckles went white as bleached bones, desperation and disbelief warring in his chest. "Eddie, I've got a daughter. She's sick, really sick. I need this job more than you could possibly understand." Eddie's weathered expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained unshakable because he'd learned long ago that foremen couldn't afford the luxury of sentiment. "I'm sorry, son. I genuinely am, if the decision was mine to make." He trailed off, because they both understood the cruel mathematics of corporate decision-making. Trevor cleaned out his locker with mechanical precision, each personal item another reminder of stability slipping through his fingers like water. His work gloves, worn smooth by 3 years of honest labor and dedication that apparently counted for nothing when profit margins needed adjustment. The thermos Hazel had decorated with princess stickers during a craft project, her innocent artwork now a mockery of happier times. A photograph from her first day of school, gap-toothed grin bright with possibility that felt like cruel irony now. "This ain't right, Trevor," muttered Carlos, the welder who'd worked the adjacent station for 2 years. "You're the best damn mechanic we've got in this whole place. Those corporate suits don't know shit about what actually keeps this operation running." Other workers gathered around like mourners at a wake, their faces grim with solidarity and barely concealed fear because they all understood they could be next when the corporate axe fell again. Martha from the payroll department approached quietly, pressing something into Trevor's palm before walking away without making eye contact. He looked down to find $200 in crumpled bills, money she probably couldn't spare but had given anyway. "It's not charity," she'd whispered over her shoulder. "It's family helping family, the way it's supposed to work." The gesture broke something fundamental inside Trevor's chest, revealing the raw humanity that still existed when systems failed and institutions abandoned the people they were supposed to protect. The rain had turned vicious by the time Trevor left the steelworks for the final time, transforming the industrial district into a waterlogged wasteland of broken dreams and rusted ambitions. His pickup truck coughed and sputtered through empty streets, past shuttered factories and boarded-up businesses that told the story of American manufacturing's slow death. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against sheets of water, their rhythmic beating like a countdown to some inevitable disaster. He found himself thinking about Hazel's face that morning, too pale and fragile for her 8 years, like a bird with clipped wings trying to remember how flight was supposed to work. His phone buzzed against the dashboard with electronic insistence, the screen lighting up to display Dr. Thompson's office number. Trevor's hands began shaking before he even answered, because calls from medical professionals never brought good news, especially not at the end of what was already shaping up to be the worst day of his adult life. Mr. Hayes. The receptionist's voice carried that particular blend of professional sympathy and clinical detachment that healthcare workers perfected over years of delivering devastating news. Dr. Thompson needs to speak with you urgently regarding Hazel's latest test results. Can you hold for just a moment while I connect you? The hold music was generic classical, each note sounding like a funeral dirge played on cheap speakers. When Dr. Thompson finally came on the line, his voice carried the weight of medical authority mixed with genuine human compassion, the tone of a man who'd spent years balancing hope against harsh reality. Trevor, he said, and the use of his first name felt more ominous than any formal address could have been. I've spent the morning reviewing Hazel's latest brain scans, and I'm afraid we can't delay any longer. Her condition is deteriorating faster than our most pessimistic projections indicated. The tumor is expanding at an alarming rate, putting increasing pressure on critical brain structures. Trevor pulled his truck over to the side of the road, rain hammering the windshield like bullets from an angry sky. Doc, I lost my job today, Trevor said, the words tasting like ashes and defeat in his mouth. I don't have health insurance anymore. I don't have anything except $43 in my wallet and a pile of medical bills I'll never be able to pay. The silence that followed stretched between them like a chasm, pregnant with implications neither man wanted to acknowledge. There are charitable organizations, Dr. Thompson said finally, though doubt colored his voice like watercolors bleeding into wet paper. Medical assistance programs, payment plans with extended terms. Let me make some calls, see what might be available for your situation. But Trevor could hear the professional uncertainty, the tone of a man who'd watched too many families destroyed by the intersection of poverty and disease. The call ended with polite promises and desperate hope, but Trevor understood the brutal mathematics of his situation better than any doctor could explain it. He was watching his daughter die in slow motion, powerless to intervene in any meaningful way. Rain pounded the roof of his truck like artillery fire, each impact a reminder of chaos beyond human control or understanding. The industrial district stretched around him like a graveyard of American prosperity. Empty warehouses and rusted machinery telling silent stories of jobs that had moved to cheaper shores. It was then that he noticed the sedan in his rearview mirror, approaching at impossible speed through the rain-slicked wasteland where his world and someone else's were about to collide in ways neither could possibly imagine. Time seemed to slow to honey-thick seconds as the silver sedan launched itself into the air like a missile aimed directly at destiny. Trevor watched in horrified fascination as physics and fate conspired to create a moment of pure destruction, metal meeting concrete in a symphony of violence that would replay in his dreams for years to come. The impact sent shockwaves through the asphalt, through his truck, through his very soul as the sedan crumpled like expensive origami. The gas tank ruptured with a whoosh that sucked oxygen from the surrounding air, unleashing orange flames that painted the industrial landscape in hellish hues. Steam rose from wet pavement as raindrops evaporated on contact with superheated metal, creating an otherworldly fog that blurred the boundaries between reality and nightmare. Trevor's truck door slammed behind him before conscious thought engaged, his body moving on instincts older than civilization itself. The heat hit him like a physical force, singeing the hair on his arms and evaporating doubt from his mind as he approached the twisted wreckage. Inside the mangled sedan, he could see her through the spider-webbed safety glass, a woman in expensive clothing, unconscious and bleeding, trapped in what was rapidly becoming a death trap. Her breathing was shallow and labored, each breath a small victory against the smoke that was beginning to fill the passenger compartment. Blood trickled from a gash above her left eyebrow, staining her cream silk blouse with crimson reality that no amount of money could wash away. Everything about her appearance screamed wealth and privilege. The cut of her clothing, the quality of her jewelry, the manicured perfection of her hands that had clearly never known honest physical labor. Her auburn hair was matted with blood and rain, diamond studs in her ears catching firelight like fallen stars. But in that moment, social class and economic status meant nothing to the flames that were growing hungrier by the second. Death was the great equalizer, the one force in the universe that didn't recognize bank accounts or stock portfolios or corporate hierarchies. Right now, she needed him more desperately than she'd probably ever needed anyone in her entire protected, privileged existence. Glass crunched under Trevor's work boots as he circled to the passenger side of the wreckage, looking for the best point of entry into what was rapidly becoming a furnace. The driver's door was crushed beyond any hope of opening, metal twisted into abstract sculptures that spoke eloquently of violent physics and randomly distributed misfortune. His tire iron made quick work of the passenger window, safety glass cascading to the ground like ice crystals in the firelight, each shard reflecting orange flames in tiny kaleidoscopes. Smoke was pouring from the engine compartment now, thick and black and hungry for more oxygen to feed the conflagration that threatened to consume everything within its expanding reach. Trevor squeezed his body through the window frame, ignoring the sharp edges that tore his jacket and left shallow cuts on his arms like razor marks. The woman's pulse was weak but steady under his fingertips, her skin clammy and cold despite the growing heat that surrounded them both. "Come on, lady," he whispered, his voice rough with smoke inhalation and raw emotion as he worked his arms under her shoulders. "Not today. Whatever demons brought you to this god-forsaken place, you're not dying here on my watch." Her expensive designer heels caught on the twisted gear shift as he maneuvered her unconscious form through the window opening, silk and leather proving inadequate against the harsh realities of physics and flame. The fire had already begun licking at the interior upholstery with eager tongues when Trevor finally dragged her clear of the wreckage, depositing her on wet pavement just as the passenger compartment was fully engulfed. Sirens wailed in the distance like electronic banshees, but Trevor knew with grim certainty that emergency responders would arrive too late to do anything except document the aftermath. He knelt beside the unconscious woman on the rain-soaked asphalt, checking her vital signs with the methodical competence of someone who'd taken basic first aid courses. Her breathing was more stable now, freed from the smoke-filled confines of the destroyed vehicle, though she remained deeply unconscious from trauma and shock. When the ambulance finally arrived, paramedics swarmed around them both like uniformed angels, checking vital signs and radioing medical information to the hospital while Trevor stepped back into the role of concerned bystander. "You probably saved her life," one of the paramedics told him, while wrapping a blanket around Trevor's shoulders like a medal he hadn't asked for. "Another few minutes in that smoke and heat, and this would have been a recovery operation instead of a rescue mission. She's incredibly lucky you happened to be here and decided to get involved instead of just driving past." The word lucky left a bitter taste in Trevor's mouth, because if she was truly lucky, she wouldn't have crashed in the first place. As the paramedics prepared the woman for transport, a small gold object caught Trevor's attention, glinting in the emergency lights like a fallen star. It had apparently been thrown from her jacket during the rescue, landing on the wet asphalt where it reflected the rotating red and blue lights. He picked it up without thinking, intending to return it once the immediate crisis had passed and the world made sense again. The engraving was elegant and expensive, clearly custom-made. V.S. CEO, Sterling Enterprises. Trevor had heard of Sterling Enterprises, had seen their corporate logo on billboards throughout the city advertising success and prosperity that felt as distant as the moon. This woman existed in a rarefied atmosphere of boardrooms and stock options, a world as foreign to his daily struggles as any alien planet described in science fiction novels. Mercy General Hospital carried the distinctive institutional smell of disinfectant mixed with human suffering, a combination that seemed permanently embedded in the walls and fixtures. Trevor found the woman in room 314, awake now, but appearing somehow smaller and more vulnerable in the harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look sterile and impersonal. Her green eyes were alert despite the professional bandaging across her forehead, intelligence burning bright behind the temporary confusion of trauma and medication. When she noticed him standing somewhat awkwardly in the doorway, her entire face transformed with an expression of genuine warmth and gratitude that seemed to illuminate the clinical sterility of the hospital room. "You're him," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation, but rich with an emotion that sounded expensive, even in its roughened state. "The paramedics told me what you did, how you risked your own life to pull me out of that car when most people would have driven past without a second thought." She introduced herself simply as Victoria, though something in her manner and the careful way she spoke suggested layers of complexity beneath that straightforward name. Trevor returned the gold badge he'd recovered from the accident scene, watching with interest as her fingers closed around it protectively, as if it contained secrets more valuable than mere corporate identification. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, the words carrying far more weight than simple gratitude should bear. "For everything. I honestly don't know many people who would have stopped, who would have put themselves in danger for a complete stranger." The observation hung between them like a bridge, spanning the enormous gap between their different worlds and life experiences. When visiting hours began winding down and the hospital initiated its evening ritual of enforced quiet, Victoria reached into her designer purse and extracted a thick roll of currency, more money than Trevor had seen in one place since his brief stint in construction 5 years earlier. "Please," she said, extending the bills toward him with both hands in a gesture that felt almost ceremonial. "Let me thank you properly for what you've done. This is just a starting point, a small token of appreciation for a debt I can never really repay." Trevor stared at the money as if it were a coiled serpent preparing to strike, his ingrained pride warring desperately against his daughter's urgent medical needs. The bills were crisp and new, probably representing $5,000 or $6,000, enough to make a significant impact on the medical bills that were slowly crushing his family's future. But accepting the money felt like selling something essential about himself, some core principle that was worth more than temporary financial relief. "I can't take your money," Trevor said finally, the words scraping against his throat like sandpaper. "I didn't help you expecting any kind of reward. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, because that's what decent people do when someone needs assistance." Victoria's eyes widened with what appeared to be genuine surprise, as if she'd never encountered someone who would refuse easy money, who would choose abstract principles over concrete financial benefit. As Trevor walked toward the elevator, Victoria called after him with a note of desperation that seemed disproportionate to their brief acquaintance. "If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call me. I mean that sincerely, Trevor." "Ah." The business card she pressed into his palm felt substantial and expensive, heavy with implications he couldn't begin to understand. The elevator doors closed on Victoria's concerned face, but Trevor could feel her gaze following him like searchlights penetrating the darkness of his private struggles, illuminating corners of his life he preferred to keep hidden from public view. The next 2 days dissolved into a fever dream of job applications leading nowhere and medical appointments offering nothing except increasingly dire prognoses. Trevor spent his mornings trudging from business to business like a door-to-door salesman of his own desperation, his resume growing more pathetic with each polite rejection. "Sorry, we're not hiring at this time." "Perhaps you could try again next month when our situation might improve. We'll certainly keep your application on file and contact you if anything suitable opens up." The words all carried the same underlying message. Not you. Not now. Not ever in this lifetime. His afternoons were devoted to maintaining vigil at Hazel's bedside in the pediatric ward, watching helplessly as his daughter grew visibly weaker with each passing hour. The brain tumor was asserting its malevolent presence more aggressively now, triggering seizures that came with increasing frequency and duration. Each episode seemed to steal another piece of Hazel's personality, erasing fragments of her vibrant spirit like an invisible eraser working methodically on the chalk of her young soul. The medical staff did their professional best to manage her symptoms, but everyone understood they were merely treating effects rather than addressing the underlying cause that required surgical intervention beyond the family's financial reach. Dr. Thompson intercepted Trevor outside Hazel's room following another particularly severe seizure that had lasted nearly 12 minutes. "We're running out of time, Mr. Hayes," the physician said with the gentle directness of someone who'd spent years learning to balance honesty with compassion. "The tumor is expanding at a rate that exceeds our most pessimistic projections. It's now pressing against brain structures that control essential functions: speech, motor coordination, cognitive processing. Without immediate surgical intervention, we're facing the very real possibility of permanent neurological damage." He paused, choosing his next words with the precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. "And if we delay much beyond the next week, we'll be confronting something far worse than damage. We'll be looking at losing her entirely." The brutal finality of Dr. Thompson's assessment hit Trevor with the force of a physical assault, each word another weight added to the crushing burden he was already struggling to bear. His knees threatened to buckle as the full implications of the prognosis penetrated his consciousness like stones dropping into deep water. What about payment assistance programs? He asked desperately, grasping at increasingly thin straws. Charitable organizations, medical loans, anything that might provide a pathway forward? Dr. Thompson's expression softened with professional sympathy that somehow hurt worse than anger would have. I've exhausted every option I can think of, the doctor replied quietly. The charitable foundations have waiting lists measured in months or years. The assistance programs require insurance coverage you no longer possess or steady income you can't demonstrate. That evening found Trevor sitting in his pickup truck outside the hospital, engine running to maintain some warmth against the October chill, while he stared at Victoria's business card, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. The cardstock was thick and expensive, whispering of boardrooms and power lunches and casual decisions that could alter thousands of lives. Sterling Enterprises represented a world of influence and resources that might as well have existed on another planet for all the relevance it had to Trevor's daily struggles with poverty and desperation. This woman, this Victoria, moved through that rarefied atmosphere where money was simply a tool for solving problems rather than the insurmountable obstacle it represented in Trevor's experience. Maybe his father's stern lectures about the corrosive nature of charity had been wrong, outdated wisdom from a different era when pride could be afforded by working-class families. Maybe principles were luxuries that became meaningless when your child's life hung in the balance like a sword suspended by threads that grew thinner each day. Trevor picked up his phone multiple times before finally summoning the courage to dial the number printed on the elegant business card, his fingers trembling with more than just the cold air seeping through his truck's failing weather seals. The phone rang precisely 3 times before a professionally trained voice answered with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to managing communications for very important people. Sterling Enterprises, Executive Office. How may I assist you this evening? The woman's accent carried subtle markers of expensive education and cultural refinement that immediately made Trevor conscious of his own working-class speech patterns. "This is Trevor Hayes," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Victoria Sterling gave me this number after I helped her following her car accident. She said I should call if I ever needed anything." There was a brief pause, filled with the sound of computer keys clicking with mechanical precision, followed by a noticeable shift in the assistant's tone that suggested Trevor's name had triggered some kind of recognition protocol within their system. "Mr. Hayes, of course. Ms. Sterling left very specific instructions regarding any contact from you. She's cleared her schedule for this evening and would very much like to meet with you at our downtown headquarters if that's convenient. How quickly could you be at our offices?" The question struck Trevor like cold water, reality crashing over him in waves of social anxiety and class consciousness that made him painfully aware of his second-hand clothing and working man's appearance. The Sterling Enterprises building dominated the downtown skyline like a gleaming monument to capitalism, its 40 floors of glass and steel reaching toward heaven with the confident assumption that prosperity was simply a matter of proper ambition and strategic thinking. Trevor felt profoundly underdressed before he even stepped out of his battered pickup truck, his work boots and single clean shirt marking him as a visitor from a different economic universe entirely. The lobby was designed to overwhelm and inspire in equal measure, featuring security personnel who resembled Secret Service agents and marble flooring that probably cost more than most families spent on housing in an entire year. "I'm here to see Victoria Sterling," Trevor announced to the receptionist, presenting the business card like a talisman that might protect him from the crushing weight of class differences and social hierarchies. The woman's expression underwent an immediate transformation from polite professional dismissal to something approaching reverence, as if Trevor had just invoked the name of royalty or declared himself an ambassador from an important foreign power. "Ms. Sterling will see you immediately, Mr. Hayes," she replied, her voice now carrying the respectful tone reserved for people who clearly possessed some form of hidden significance or influence. The elevator ascended through the building's 40 floors with mechanical precision, each number on the display representing another level of success and prosperity that felt as distant from Trevor's world as galaxies visible only through powerful telescopes. When the doors whispered open on the executive floor, he stepped into an office complex that represented more wealth than existed in his entire neighborhood, a space designed to demonstrate power and success through every carefully chosen detail of decoration and furniture. Victoria stood silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed the city into a living painting, making everything below appear manageable and controllable from this elevated perspective. When she turned to face him, Trevor experienced a moment of profound cognitive dissonance that left him struggling to reconcile different versions of the same person. This was not the vulnerable accident victim he'd rescued from a burning vehicle. This was corporate power incarnate, authority and confidence wrapped in designer clothing that probably cost more than he'd earned in the past 6 months of steady employment. "Hello, Trevor," Victoria said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable weight of boardroom decisions and billion-dollar transactions, rather than the hoarse gratitude he remembered from the hospital. "I've been hoping you would call, wondering when pride might give way to practical necessity. The nameplate on her imposing desk identified her as Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, titles that transformed her from a fellow human being into something approaching a force of nature. The woman whose life he'd saved was apparently one of the most powerful corporate leaders in the entire region. The psychological disconnect was so complete it made Trevor's head spin like a carousel, reality shifting beneath his feet in ways that challenged every assumption he'd made about social structures and human relationships. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," he stammered, backing towards the elevator like a man who'd accidentally wandered into the wrong movie or stumbled through a portal into an alternate dimension. Victoria's smile carried sadness and understanding touched with something that might have been loneliness or regret for roads not taken. "The only mistake would be thinking you wouldn't eventually need help," she replied gently, gesturing toward a leather chair that represented more money than Trevor spent on rent in multiple months. Victoria settled behind her executive desk with the fluid grace of someone born to command, though her eyes retained the warmth and humanity he remembered from their hospital encounter. "I owe you a comprehensive explanation," she began, folding her hands with deliberate composure, designed to put him at ease despite the overwhelming disparity in their circumstances. "About who I really am, about the work I do, about why someone with my resources was driving alone through an industrial district during a storm." She paused, selecting her words with the precision of someone who understood their potential impact. "The truth is, Trevor, I wasn't always this person you see before you. I haven't always lived in glass towers making decisions that affect thousands of lives." The story Victoria shared seemed to belong in fiction rather than reality, like something from inspirational movies about people who overcame impossible odds through determination and luck. Sterling Enterprises wasn't merely a successful corporation, she explained. It was an empire constructed from nothing by someone who'd experienced poverty as intimate and devastating as anything Trevor had ever known. I understand what it means to watch someone you love slip away because you can't afford proper medical care, she said, her voice growing softer as painful memories surfaced despite years of success and achievement. My foster mother died of treatable cancer when I was 16 years old. No insurance coverage, no financial resources, no options except to sit beside her bed and watch her fade away day by day. Every single day since then, Victoria continued, rising from her chair to stand once again at those impossible windows that made the city look like an elaborate model. I've asked myself the same fundamental question. What's the point of accumulating wealth and power if I can't use them to help people facing the same impossible situations I once knew intimately? She turned back toward Trevor, and he could see tears forming in her eyes, making her human and vulnerable again despite all the trappings of corporate success. That's why I occasionally drive through neighborhoods like yours, taking routes through parts of the city that people in my position usually avoid. I need those reminders of where I came from, need to see the faces behind statistics about medical bankruptcies and childhood poverty. When Trevor described Hazel's condition in detail, the brain tumor, the increasing seizures, the $200,000 price tag for surgery that might save her life, Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks like a dam breaking under emotional pressure too great to contain. $200,000, she repeated, reaching for an expensive checkbook with hands that trembled slightly. That represents pocket change to me, Trevor. Less money than I routinely spend on corporate hospitality in a single month. Please let me help you. Let me do what I desperately wish someone could have done for me when I was 16 and helpless. The check Victoria wrote represented more money than Trevor had ever seen in one location, enough to save his daughter's life and transform their entire future in a single stroke of a pen. But as she extended it towards him like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in deep water, his inherited pride reared up with the fury of a wounded animal protecting its territory. "I don't want your charity," Trevor declared, the words exploding from his mouth with more violence than he'd intended, knocking over the expensive chair in his haste to retreat from temptation and the crushing acknowledgement of his own powerlessness. "I don't need your guilt money or your corporate social responsibility initiatives," he continued, profanity spilling out like poison from a wound that had been festering too long in darkness and silence. "You think you can just write a check and make everything better? You sit up here in your glass palace, dispensing charity to make yourself feel better about having more money than entire communities, but you don't understand what it's really like down there, where the rest of us struggle every day just to survive." The words came harsher and more bitter than Trevor had meant them to be, but once the floodgates opened, he couldn't seem to control the torrent of anger and frustration and fear that had been building pressure for months. Victoria's face went completely white, but her voice remained steady despite the obvious shock of his verbal assault on her character and motivations. "This isn't charity, Trevor," she replied quietly, her tone carrying the authority of someone who'd built an empire but hadn't forgotten the lessons of poverty and powerlessness. "This is about recognizing human worth, about understanding that some people deserve better than the random cruelties of an economic system that punishes the unlucky." But Trevor was already backing toward the elevator, shaking his head violently in rejection of help that felt like surrender, like the final admission of his complete failure as a father and provider. "You don't understand anything!" he snarled, his voice cracking with emotion that had nowhere else to go except out through his throat in ugly, painful words. "You don't know what it means to fail your own child so completely, to be so goddamn useless that you can't even keep her alive when she needs you most." The profanity hung between them like a physical slap, inappropriate and harsh, but carrying the desperate honesty of someone who'd reached the absolute limit of his endurance. Victoria's composure finally cracked, her hands shaking as she set the check down on her desk, like it was made of glass that might shatter under too much pressure. "Security!" Victoria called into her desk phone, her voice now cold as winter wind off a frozen lake. "Please escort Mr. Hayes to the lobby immediately." As uniformed guards appeared to flank him like bookends marking the end of his brief encounter with Hope, Trevor felt a savage satisfaction mixed with crushing regret that threatened to suffocate him. At least he'd maintained his principles, he told himself as they guided him toward the elevator. At least he hadn't compromised the values his father had taught him about self-reliance and the corrosive effects of accepting help from strangers who couldn't possibly understand real struggle. The elevator descent felt like falling into hell, his reflection in the polished metal doors showing a man who'd just destroyed his daughter's only chance at survival for the sake of abstract concepts that meant nothing to brain tumors or medical bills or the mathematics of childhood mortality. By the time the doors opened onto the marble lobby, regret was already consuming him from the inside like acid, but it was too late to take back the words or swallow the pride that might cost Hazel everything. That night, Trevor couldn't escape the endless replay of his confrontation with Victoria, every word and gesture haunting him like scenes from a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He sat in his pickup truck outside the hospital where his daughter lay dying, staring at nothing while self-recrimination ate away at what remained of his sanity and hope. The golden badge was still in his jacket pocket, warm against his palm like a talisman from a world he'd rejected, a physical reminder of the moment when he'd mattered in someone else's story before destroying any possibility of mattering in his own daughter's future. His phone shattered the silence like an alarm clock in a burning building, Dr. Thompson's number glowing on the screen with the promise of news that could only make an impossible situation worse. "Mr. Hayes." The doctor's voice carried gentle urgency that somehow managed to be both comforting and terrifying simultaneously. "I'm calling because Hazel has suffered another seizure, this one lasting nearly 15 minutes before we could bring it under control with emergency medication. Her brain activity is showing signs of severe stress, and we need you here immediately to discuss our rapidly diminishing options." The drive to Mercy General passed in a blur of red traffic lights and racing thoughts, each delay feeling like another nail in the coffin of his daughter's future. In the pediatric intensive care unit, Hazel looked impossibly fragile against the white institutional sheets, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed like electronic mourners maintaining vigil over a life that hung by increasingly thin threads. "The tumor is expanding faster than our worst-case projections," Dr. Thompson explained with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to balance medical honesty with human compassion. "We're now looking at perhaps 48 hours before neurological damage becomes irreversible, before we lose any realistic chance of preserving her cognitive function and quality of life." The sound of multiple engines penetrated Trevor's exhausted consciousness like distant thunder, growing louder until it seemed to shake the hospital's foundation. Through the window of Hazel's room, he could see them arranged in the parking lot below with military precision. 10 black SUVs gleaming under the artificial lights like beetles made of money and corporate power. Men in expensive suits emerged from each vehicle with choreographed efficiency, their movements suggesting the kind of coordination usually associated with government operations or corporate takeovers. The lead figure was tall and distinguished, silver-haired and commanding, carrying a leather briefcase that seemed to radiate authority and importance. Trevor's phone buzzed with mechanical insistence, displaying a number he didn't recognize but somehow expected. "Mr. Hayes, this is James Crawford, Senior Legal Counsel for Sterling Enterprises." The voice was crisp and professional, carrying the unmistakable accent of expensive education and corporate boardrooms. "Ms. Sterling has asked me to contact you regarding arrangements she's made concerning your daughter's medical situation and your family's future financial security." Ah. Before Trevor could formulate any kind of response, Crawford continued with the ruthless efficiency of someone accustomed to solving complex problems through careful planning and unlimited resources. "We are prepared to assume complete responsibility for all medical expenses related to your daughter's condition, including immediate transportation to the most advanced neurological facility in the country and a comprehensive post-operative care package that will ensure her complete recovery and long-term health," Crawford announced with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine business arrangements. "Additionally, Ms. Sterling has instructed me to offer you a position as Director of Operations at our Riverside Manufacturing Division, with a starting salary of $120,000 annually, plus comprehensive medical benefits for you and your family, effective immediately upon your acceptance." Through the hospital window, Trevor watched as medical personnel emerged from several of the SUVs, unloading sophisticated equipment with the precision of a military operation designed to save lives rather than take them. A woman in surgical scrubs was deep in conversation with Dr. Thompson near the hospital's main entrance, their body language suggesting discussions of vital importance about life and death and medical miracles that money could purchase when deployed by people with sufficient resources and determination. "There's a medical helicopter landing on the hospital roof as we speak," Crawford continued, his voice cutting through Trevor's amazement like a surgeon's scalpel. "Dr. Sarah Chen from Johns Hopkins Medical Center is aboard. She's widely regarded as one of the world's leading pediatric neurosurgeons. She's personally reviewed your daughter's case and is prepared to perform the necessary surgery at our private medical facility this evening." The following hours dissolved into a precisely orchestrated symphony of medical intervention and corporate efficiency that felt like something from a science fiction movie about societies where money could literally purchase miracles. Hazel was stabilized, prepared for transport, and surrounded by more sophisticated medical equipment than Trevor had ever seen outside of television documentaries about cutting-edge healthcare technology. Dr. Chen briefed him with quiet confidence that radiated professional competence earned through decades of successful surgeries that other physicians had declared impossible. "Your daughter's situation is certainly serious, but far from hopeless," she explained with the calm authority of someone who held life and death in her hands and had learned to balance both with equal skill and respect. "The tumor's location actually works in our favor. It's positioned in a way that makes complete removal not only possible, but highly probable. With the advanced surgical equipment and techniques available at our facility, I'm very optimistic about achieving a positive outcome that will allow Hazel to live a completely normal life. As Hazel was carefully loaded onto the helicopter that would transport her toward salvation, she managed to grab Trevor's hand with surprising strength for someone so small and medically fragile. "Am I going to be okay, Daddy?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of brave vulnerability that only children can manage when facing the incomprehensible complexities of adult problems. Trevor squeezed her small fingers gently, his own voice steady despite the earthquake of emotion threatening to tear him apart from the inside. "You're going to be absolutely perfect, sweetheart," he promised with the fierce certainty that only parental love can provide. "The very best doctors in the entire world are going to take care of you, and when you wake up, everything will be different and better than before." 3 weeks later, Trevor stood in his new office at Sterling Enterprises, watching the morning sun transform the city into a landscape of gold and infinite possibility. His 20th floor view couldn't match the commanding perspective of Victoria's executive suite, but it represented a height he'd never imagined achieving, elevation that felt like a gift from a universe that had suddenly decided to smile upon his family after months of relentless cruelty. Hazel was home and healthy, her laughter once again filling their significantly upgraded apartment with the infectious music of childhood restored to its natural rhythm and joy. The position Victoria had created specifically for him turned out to be genuinely challenging and meaningful work that utilized skills he'd almost forgotten he possessed during his years of economic struggle and desperation. The job required not just mechanical expertise, but leadership abilities and strategic thinking that transformed broken systems into efficient operations capable of helping people while generating sustainable profits. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference in ways both large and small. 6 months after the accident that had changed everything, Trevor received an elegantly engraved invitation to Sterling Enterprises' annual charity gala, an event that brought together the city's most influential people for the purpose of directing wealth toward healing rather than mere accumulation. When Victoria took the stage to address the assembled guests, Trevor found himself seeing her through completely different eyes, not as the corporate executive who'd initially intimidated him or the accident victim who'd needed his help, but as someone who'd learned that wealth without compassion was simply expensive emptiness. After her speech about second chances and the responsibilities that accompany success, they found themselves alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the city they both called home. The sounds of the gala were muffled by glass and distance, creating a pocket of peace in the midst of celebration and social obligation. "Thank you," Trevor said simply, the words carrying far more weight than their brevity might suggest to casual observers. Victoria shook her head with a smile that combined sadness and satisfaction in equal measure. "You saved my life first," she replied softly. "I just returned the favor, and honestly, you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. A reminder that real heroism doesn't require wealth or position, just the willingness to act when action is needed most. The Foundation is expanding its scope," Victoria mentioned with studied casualness, though Trevor sensed there was nothing accidental about the timing or context of this observation. "We're actively seeking someone to direct the entire operation, someone who truly understands what it means to need help and what it costs to accept assistance from others. Someone who grasps the crucial difference between charity that diminishes human dignity and justice that restores it." She looked at him directly, her green eyes serious with the weight of decisions being made in real time. Trevor thought about all the families across the country who were facing impossible choices at that very moment. Parents watching their children slip away because numbers in bank accounts mattered more than love or determination or the fundamental human desire to protect those who depended on them. "I believe I know exactly the right person for that position," Trevor said finally, his voice carrying the hard-earned certainty of someone who'd discovered that the most effective way to save yourself was often to dedicate your life to saving others who found themselves in similar desperate circumstances. And for the first time in more years than he cared to count, the future stretched ahead of them both like a highway leading toward destinations filled with hope rather than despair, illuminated by the lights of a city where miracles sometimes arrived disguised as 10 black SUVs, carrying the promise that good things could still happen to people who deserved them most.